Hey there. I'm recording this video as just a wrap for this game. It's just the second video I think I've recorded on this game, but I'm bringing the game to a close on the ninth turn out of 13. Essentially because weather stopped play. In two senses. One is that I came back to this game after we went on holiday, and then I didn't get back to it because we had a break for a week, and I fancy some lighter fare. And then I've been struggling to get back into the game. Essentially, a big game like this with like a lot of commitment necessary, to in this case remember the rules and get back into um, the interaction between supply and ground units and infant and air units, and the strategy of what you're doing on the map. It kind of asks a lot for me, at least on a break, and I have sort of failed on that account. But in another sense, it doesn't matter because I think the whole thing has drawn to a close anyway on account of weather in game. So what I'm talking about is that a couple of turns ago, so in the game, that's a couple of weeks ago, we entered a deep freeze. After being in Raputitsa for about 3 or 4 weeks. Raputitsa is thick mud, and so that slowed everything down on both sides. The deep snow is good in the sense that the units can move quicker once that happens. For example, minor rivers, you can ignore them and so forth. Everything starts moving more quickly again. Except for the German rail. So the Germans normally have 20 rail points, and now it goes down to 6. And this is a huge problem with them, is moving their supplies. German supplies come on here and here. And essentially they have 4 axes of advance, one here, one here, one here, and one here. And so you can see getting supplies up to these two is not so difficult, but getting it across to these two is a lot harder. And then, just rolling for weather of the next turn, turn 10, ahead of time to see what's happening, I rolled for heavy snow. So what that means, once again, I believe the air units are grounded. Yeah, because it counts as soup. So the air units are more or less grounded. They can just sort of act within their hex, which is useless. And and the German movement is effectively halved. The Russian movements are okay, but their transport movement is slower. Now, for the Russians, this isn't a problem. The Russians have got more supply than they need, and they've been using their 60 points of rail transportation every turn to shuffle them right up where they need. They need it sort of in 4 points essentially to meet the Germans. They've got way more supplies than they need, in part because they haven't had to be defending. The Germans have not launched any offensive for about 4 weeks now, 4 game turns. They've been trying to bring up their supplies, and if you zoomed in, you would see that a lot of the German units, like here and here and some here and scattered some here, are just out of supply, and that they've been lucky so far, but they will be taking attrition and losing steps as we go on. So the Germans have essentially been trying to handle their supply problems, consolidate units, and effectively they made a bridgehead here over the Oka River to kind of try and threaten around here, but they've had to withdraw from that. They've left someone up there, but that unit's just overstayed its welcome, really. The Russians are moving up to meet it. So essentially what happens, so going forward, what that means is deep snow, everything slows down. And the situation is, as I mentioned in the last video, that the Russians only need 6 more victory points to win. Essentially, either they knock out 6 of the strongest or the most capable German units that are 5 rated action rating. That's not their strength points, but they're kind of like their skill and ability. and those they would find in the generally in the panzer divisions, and or they take Kursk, which is worth 5 victory points. So essentially, the Russians are now they're moving out. So they had a line here, they have a line here, and they've been sort of bending this line around, and the last week they just moved out from their sort of line ahead of Voronezh, which is over here. So they're moving forwards. Essentially, they have 4 more turns. They're going to be able to take Kursk because the Germans cannot hold it. They don't have the supply and they don't have the movement to sort of perform the sweeping manoeuvres which they need to do to sort of perform well against the Soviet behemoth. The Soviet have a lot more forces. The Germans could break down their panzer divisions. You see here, one of those lines represents all the units in one of these panzer division counters. However, to do that, each unit is very weak. So on their own, those panzer divisions are powerful, but spread out, they're going to be very thin. So they could, operate a delaying action. Sometimes they detach certain ones for encirclements and so forth, but it's not going to stop the Russians. So essentially, my judgment is that the Russians will reach Kursk, and so it all hinges on whether they can take out one of the best German units, and effectively the Germans, knowing that, are going to be withdrawing those units, and what with the heavy snow coming in, and the Russians have to move quite cautiously because the better rated Germans can give them surprises on attack. So I think their best method is this kind of like just a heavy slow movement, so that an attritional attack, and also kind of like an enveloping attack, just with the mass that they're able to do. They are going to lose steps attacking the Germans, but then they will keep bringing in more. So my estimation, they will definitely take Kursk, and then the Germans will be retreating all their more valuable units so as not to be taken. So in effect, what that means is I'm going to count it a draw, but with a slim chance of strictly speaking, if the Russians took Kursk, that would be a German minor victory by 1 point, and then with a 1 point swing the other way, it would have been a Russian minor victory. So I think we count that as a draw. So I would continue the game if I was playing opposed, because it would be really interesting. We've now really reached quite a different flavour of the campaign. It was quite fast to start with, and now we've got this slow grinding sort of movement, and the German withdrawal, which has to be carefully paced, because the Russians can move faster than them as long as they can keep their supplies up. Germans, I was just looking at the German supply situation. We had some clear weather, and they have 11 transport points worth of the air units, so they could have been flying some of their supplies out, but then we've gone into the heavy snow, so that's cut that down again. So you can see the weather is really a problem, and as a solo player, I'm just sort of not so much interested, because playing opposed, it's just fun, playing with someone else, seeing what they do, and I know what I'm going to do. So I'm finding my solo play is changing, in that before I just really enjoyed just playing the whole thing and playing things through, and now I'm finding what I enjoy more about solo play is exploring a system. And so once I've explored a system to my content, I don't necessarily feel any greater satisfaction in completing the battle or the campaign or whatever. And I feel that I've explored this system enough to know what it has for me, and so I'm quite satisfied to stop the game here. Now, my kind of reflection on the system is that I would be very happy if the air was abstracted out of it. Now, it's interesting having the air. You can see over here, you've got piles of air units on airfields that are on the map. Otherwise, there's a pile of air units there, for example. But maybe in different games in this series it'd be more worthy. But here, because you get a lot of bad weather and the air doesn't come in effect, it's intermittently useful. And the Russian air is not that great. So, the Russian air is just not that useful for the Russians. So it's more a point about the Germans using it, at least at the beginning when the weather was better, to give them extra barrages on their attack. If the weather was good now, the Russians still wouldn't be able to benefit from that, and the Germans would be able to use it to sort of hinder the advance. But I don't know, just the cost, the gain to cost ratio for the air is not worth it for me, and that's as a solo player, because I have the extra burden, of playing both sides. So I'd be quite happy if that was completely abstracted out, and you didn't have to worry about chits. You just had numbers, and the airfields. I'd be happy because do I supply that airfield, then I have a range or some opportunity from that airfield, for example. Transporting supplies or basing operations from. So that was a bit of a bugbear for me. I didn't really get into the air rules from the get-go, and I realised I didn't sort of implement them as well as I could because I just found it too bothersome. I was much more interested in what was happening on the ground. And the system, I think the system is wonderful, and I'm going to go and try when I can a current rules system OCS game. I will probably go for a smaller one than this, because this, like a one mapper, this is a two mapper, because there's a lot going on. A lot going on in terms of the campaign, just more things to do. But it's a very interesting system, although I like this one in that you have 2 player turns before you do the over phase where you treat supply. I think I prefer that from the news, the up-to-date system. Although previously I enthused about how I like having supply always stuck on the map. It is a bit of a pain because you always have to work it out, but I can't really compare it to the trace supply system. I like what it did there in me concentrating on my the logistical necessity of the rail lines and the road network. So I really like the system. I'm looking forward to trying the other, the up-to-date version. I like it because you have the step reduction, so it's somewhat attritional, and then you have the slow-moving artillery, which can then present great barrages, and then you can have then you get options on the combat results table, so you can have an option whether to take a loss or a retreat. Some you have to, some you get options, and then sometimes you can get exploitation. And then also having different modes, you can have units in reserve mode. I haven't made the best of that, I know, here, and I think if I had a smaller campaign to concentrate on, then I would get into that more. But the overall view of the system's great. And this game, I think what I made a mistake here, we got Moscow here, got Voronezh here, Kursk here, and my idea, looking at the map with the heavy terrain around here, was that to get the Germans sweeping round like this, and so if they could take this, they want to take sort of all these beginning ones and Kursk, and then I was hoping to take Ural. There's a 5 victory point Yelets there. I wasn't maybe Voronezh if that becomes an opportunity, but if I played it again, I wouldn't do that, and I would concentrate. I would have my main axis of advance here, here, and here, and so this would be a flank. Rather than a flanking manoeuvre, it would be flank defence. So I thought that because of the wide open spaces, I would make use of all the panzer armies, and I guess on paper that's what the German High Command were thinking, because you had more infantry up here and more panzers down here. It makes a lot of sense, but there is a lot of open space here, so you could use your Panzer armies up this line, and there's a river there to go around, and there's some woods and so forth, but that's not too bad. That they could come around here, and that would have been meant I would have been able to manage this supply problem a lot more. For example, I could have I had my railway converting unit. He converted railway all the way up to here, and then he started converting it up to here, and that was kind of useless. If I'd been converting from here and up to here, then I could have brought all my supply from Smolensk here and not split it between Konotop and Smolensk, and then I could have sent some up here, and then this one's I could have this could have gone by rail, and this I could have trucked up here and here, and it would have been a lot better on the supply solution. So that is what this game has taught me about this campaign in the fashion that I played it, and that is great, and what I think you want this game for. So with that, that's over and out on Guderian's Blitzkrieg, the original, and I hope you enjoyed the coverage. I'm hoping to come up next with another sort of neglected game, which is Austerlitz, Napoleon's Greatest Victory. So this was designed by David Fox, who's designed some other games, and like Musket and Pike or something like that. This was intending to be the first in the Great Battles of the Napoleonic Wars series. So like the Great Battles of History series by GMT, this was to be a series, and it never lifted off. I think there was some problems people found with the rules. There was some errata, but and then some difficulty in the system itself, for example, multi-hex counters. So I want to give that a go, and that's a huge 4-mapper. That's going to be difficult, but there are some 1 and 2 map scenarios. So I want to get into that and see what, again, I don't mind that some people have really lowly rated it. Other people have said, no, there's no problem with it. I didn't have a problem. You just need to get your head around this and that, and then you're good to go. But I love Napoleonic Austerlitz as a battle. I've gamed in several different systems, 3 or 4 now, so that would be the 5th, I think. So it's very interesting to get another designer's take, A, on Napoleonics, and B, on Austerlitz. So I'm looking forward to that. Over and out.